Welcome into Words with Wallace. I'm your host, Nick Wallace. Coming at you, it's Wednesday, May 21st. Recording this podcast, honestly, it's almost midnight. I'm pretty exhausted, and part of the reason is because got done watching and then rewatching one of the best games that I've seen in a very long time. I don't want to be too reactionary here, but I do want to say, especially with out of the games where I've been like a neutral fan, so like non-Celtics games and whatever, that's one of the best NBA games I've ever seen, start to finish. Of course, talking about Knicks Pacers game one. So we are going to be breaking down exactly what happened, the incredible comeback by the Indiana Pacers, how they were able to pull out that win in overtime. We're going to talk all about that, predictions for the rest of that series, also reacting to game one of the Western Conference Finals between the Thunder and the Timberwolves, giving predictions and analysis for the rest of that series as well. And then we're going to rank the biggest disappointments of the round two exit. So we're going to get to all that. I'm sure some of you guys are tuning in just to get my thoughts on the elimination of the Boston Celtics. I don't want to spend too much time talking about the Celtics. Yes, it sucks. It really sucks. That's kind of underselling it, to be totally honest with you. But felt like I talked about the Celtics a lot on my previous few podcasts. And frankly, and when I recorded basically right after game four ended, we kind of knew where it was headed. I mean, we had seen the Tatum injury. I didn't want to come out and say it, but I kind of knew he had torn his Achilles at that point in time just by how he reacted after the injury. And so the writing was kind of on the wall, and really everything I said in that last podcast kind of sums up my feelings on the end of that Celtics season. So we will talk about the Celtics a little bit, and then of course we will be doing like a full off-season episode about the team and the direction that they should go. So I'll preview that a little bit at the end of this episode, but we have plenty of time to talk about the Celtics, sadly, now that they are eliminated. So let's move on to the teams that are actually playing and talk about this game between the Pacers and the New York Knicks. Once I finally got over the fact that my Celtics were not playing in the Eastern Conference Finals for the first time in a while, I must say I really enjoyed this basketball game. This was incredible, and frankly, the expectations for a Knicks-Pacers Eastern Conference, while it certainly wasn't the two teams that we expected to be here, really at any point during the regular season, and certainly before the playoffs started, I knew that this series is destined for 7 games. It's reigniting an old rivalry. These two teams just had a really awesome 7-game series in round 2 last year. So frankly, my expectations were through the roof for this series, and the opener didn't disappoint. So to give some context, and honestly, the first 3 quarters of the game were pretty incredible too. I mean, really back and forth. I think there were like 15 lead changes or something like that throughout. But really, it gets juicy, I would say, with about 8 minutes left in the game, right? Because Jalen Brunson was in foul trouble. He picked up his 5th foul with, I want to say, like 8 or 9 minutes left in the game. And they end up pulling him when the Knicks are actually up, I think 8 or 9 at that point in time. And immediately it looks like Indiana has a huge window to get back in the game. And it seems like they kind of squander it, right? I think on basically back-to-back possessions, Miles McBride and Karl Anthony Towns are fouled, taking 3-point shots. And both of those fouls were pretty terrible. I mean, I did agree with both of those calls. And it was just kind of some boneheaded plays by the Pacers in that situation. And I think they ended up making 5 of the total 6 free throws. And so suddenly the Knicks have momentum, the Garden's rocking, and I think the largest lead of the game for the Knicks was a 17-point advantage with a little bit more than 6 minutes left in the game. And then, you can find the screenshot you want that is the most damaging for Knicks fans, but this was a full-on choke job by the Knicks. I'm not sure if it was quite on the same level of the choke jobs that the Celtics had in games 1 and 2 of round 2, but it was pretty damn close. Now, a lot of it was just absolute heroics by the Indiana Pacers, and Aaron Nesmith specifically. This guy had a heat check really unlike anything I've ever seen. It looks like the first 3-pointer that he hit was with 4 minutes and 45 seconds left in the game, drilled it, and then went on to make 5 more 3-pointers in the final 4 minutes of the game. I mean, it was absolutely ridiculous. And the last couple that he hit, I mean, he was coming off of a screen, like fading away. He kind of shook off Josh Hart. I mean, this guy, it literally was like NBA Jam level stuff from, again, Aaron Nesmith. He's a guy who the Celtics kind of gave up on. It was really no thought at all to put him in the package for Malcolm Brogdon a couple of years ago. And since then has gotten better year over year. And now he's crucial to the Indiana Pacers between what he gives you on the defensive end of the court, and now he's been a really reliable outside shooter. But to say anybody saw that ridiculous run coming just would not be accurate at all. And the funny part about the Knicks blowing that lead is it wasn't just Nesmith going on a heater and then their offense stalling. They were consistently getting a couple decent looks. Like Anunoby had a layup, Brunson had a couple of nice finishes, Towns had a bucket. I mean, down the stretch, the Knicks were actually still executing their offense at a decent level. The difference is that they were getting twos while Indiana was getting threes on the other end of the court. Halliburton had one of those threes as well. And on the final Nesmith three that he hits, he cuts the deficit all the way down to 2 points with 23 seconds left in the game. Maybe the most damning thing the Knicks did during this run was some poor free throw shooting. I mean, it wasn't completely terrible, but you had both Karl-Anthony Towns and OG Anunoby going 1 for 2 at the line on back-to-back trips to the free throw line. And that put the Pacers in a situation where they were down 2 with 7 seconds left in the game. Of course, despite the hot hand from Aaron Nesmith, Tyrese Halliburton has been the guy who's been the closer for Indiana really all season long, and especially has had some incredibly clutch moments against the Bucks in round 1, against the Cavs in round 2, and then tonight, the first game of the Eastern Conference Finals. Gets the ball, basically gets all the way to the rim, kind of doubles back, looks like he has an opportunity to hit like a little elbow jumper relatively comfortably over Mitchell Robinson, who I know obviously has a ton of length there, but instead of just settling for the mid-range jumper that would have tied the game, Halliburton takes like an extra 2 or 3 steps back, gets all the way back to the three-point line, throws up a Hail Mary, and I'm sure by now you guys have seen it, the shot that hits the back of the rim, skies basically over the shot clock, and then somehow drops in as time expires. And it looks immediately like the Pacers win that game. Halliburton's doing like the Reggie Miller choke sign. You would kind of hope with Reggie Miller on the call, he would have something better to say in that situation. I know it's a bit overwhelming, but like Reggie was just kind of laughing like a moron the entire time, but whatever. It looks like the Pacers have won the game, but upon replay, Halliburton literally has one toe on the line. So instead of the Pacers making that ridiculous comeback to win, now it's going to overtime. And that within itself that the Pacers were able to come back was utterly ridiculous. But then you have, Halliburton mocking the Knicks fans, like the Garden is completely silent, but now they have like a new hope going into overtime when it looks like they lost there for a second. So overtime still absolutely could have gone either way. There were a couple lead changes in overtime. New York got out to an early lead, and there were some great plays on both sides of the ball. But I think what stood out the most in overtime was the play of Andrew Nembhard. I mean, this is another guy who's been a huge playoff riser this entire postseason, and even last year. I mean, Celtics fans know very well how dominant he was during the Eastern Conference Finals. I think he had 9 total points in overtime, which is pretty ridiculous, and I think his best play was like his final bucket of the game that came with about 30 seconds left, where he just caught Josh Hart sleeping. He had his back facing Nembhard, just immediately makes a super hard backdoor cut. Halliburton finds him immediately, and that gave the Pacers a 1-point lead. And then, of course, the play of overtime that I hope gets its shine. I mean, I know people are going to be focused on the crazy Nesmith run and the absurd bounce that Halliburton buzzer beater took to send it to overtime. But you could even make the argument that the play of the game was the dunk that Obi Toppin had with 15 seconds left, inbounds the ball, then goes backdoor, catches it on the run, and just cocks it back, clearly gets fouled by Mikal Bridges, like pretty hard across the arms, and just slams it over him to give the Pacers a 3-point lead. And again, realistically, that was definitely an and one, and Toppin should have had the opportunity to effectively end the game with 15 seconds left, giving them a 4-point lead. But instead, New York gets the ball back. They get a couple of good looks to end the game. Indiana makes the decision not to foul, but Brunson settles for a step-back jumper, ends up airballing it. Josh Hart, in typical Josh Hart fashion, gets an incredible offensive rebound, kicks it out to a wide open Karl-Anthony Towns, who was pretty incredible during this game, but leaves the three way short, never really had a chance, and then that does it, and the Knicks are dead. So the Garden is completely stunned. I mean, again, a 17-point lead with just 6 minutes left in the game, and again, I'm sure you can find more damning screenshots where the lead was even harder to choke away after that, but it really comes down to the heroics of, if I had to attribute it to any 3 guys, it obviously beat Aaron Nesmith, Tyrese Halliburton, and then Andrew Nembhard in overtime. And while I'd love to say that this is just a massive swing for the series and suddenly Indiana has all this momentum, it could definitely go this way, but this really doesn't knock me off the scent that this series is destined to go 7 games. Now, heading into this Eastern Conference Finals series, I really just wanted to see both teams lose and suffer. I'm sure if you guys listened to this podcast before, you know I've been on the record of being a pretty strong, pretty outspoken Tyrese Halliburton and Indiana Pacers hater overall. But I'm not going to lie, man. That game was really fun. And the style that the Pacers play is really fun to watch. I can't lie. I've never really been a denier of that. And I'm just starting to get bought in on a few more Pacers that are making me come around on the team as a whole. Like, I love Andrew Nembhard. Obi Toppin is sick. He's been a really awesome bench player all year long between the highlight dunks and the fact that he's like a really solid outside shooter at this point in his career is a nice plus as well. Mathurin definitely plays with an edge. He's a guy I've kind of liked since he was a rookie. So I don't know, man. I'm starting to buy in on Indiana a little bit. My pick for the series, to be totally honest with you, was Knicks in 7. Again, I feel more certain that this series is going 7 games than I do either side coming out on top. Like, who knows who's going to be healthy and who's going to be hot by the time we get to a game 7 that I think we're headed for. But I am going to stick with my pick of Knicks in 7. I just think ultimately they have the better closer. They have a little bit more talent on the roster, but at the same time, you could make a great argument for Indiana because the style that they play, I think that they have the advantage in the coaching department for sure. Rick Carlisle has been awesome with this group. And the fact that they are like truly 8 deep, like their starting lineup is really solid and they have 2 of the biggest playoff risers in their starting lineup between Nembhard and Nesmith. And then off the bench, this is going to be a huge TJ McConnell series with his ability to guard Jalen Brunson better than most guys and just control that second offense when Tyrese Halliburton is out of the game. Then you have Toppin, who obviously we just talked about in the big moments he had. Also a revenge series, worth noting. Obi Toppin drafted by the Knicks, and I know a lot of Knicks fans were sad to see him go, I think 2 years ago in the summer when he signed with Indiana, so kind of a nice revenge for him in game 1 at the Garden. And then you also have Mathurin coming off the bench as well. So again, solid 8 deep roster, definitely deeper than what New York has to offer, where they can really only count on Mitchell Robinson coming off the bench and sometimes Deuce McBride to give them solid minutes. So again, this series is a complete coin flip. Just buckle up. It's great to see this rivalry renewed. It's going to be a lot of fun. But ultimately, my pick was Knicks in 7, and I'll stick with that despite the results of game 1. Because we are here in the conference finals, and it is really unbelievable to think that any of these 4 teams now has the opportunity to win either their first title ever in the Thunder, Pacers, and Timberwolves, or in the case of the New York Knicks, their first title in 50 years. So the narrative around these guys is going to change a lot. Obviously, we have time to break down exactly what this means for the best player on the ultimate championship winning team. And while I think one team kind of stands alone as a heavy favorite right about now, it is just worth considering what it would look like if the Pacers win and if the Knicks pull this off. And I was kind of planning on doing this rant, again, kind of leaning into how much I dislike Tyrese Halliburton. I'm coming around on him a little bit more after another incredible 30-point and extremely clutch playoff performance tonight. But I do kind of feel like he's the polar bear in Arlington, Texas, so to speak, when you put him next to the other best players in the series. I mean, Shea, obviously, we'll talk about him in a little bit, just won MVP today. No doubt one of the best players in the league. I think Ant has solidified himself as a true superstar in the league and a guy that ultimately can be the face of this league and even has the potential to be the best overall player in this league because Anthony Edwards keeps getting better year over year. And I think Brunson is in those conversations as well with how dominant he's been. He's a clutch player of the year. He's a guy that I feel like has an argument to be made, definitely top 10 at this point, could be pushing top 5. But then you have Tyrese Halliburton, and I know he's had a really awesome playoff run, and the beauty is, if Indiana is able to win this series and advance to the NBA Finals, he has the next 3 weeks to really rewrite his story and improve what people think of him even more. So he definitely can get there, but if I had to pick a guy right now that maybe thrust into these top 5 conversations that doesn't quite belong there, it's probably Tyrese Halliburton, just because I want to draw to the fact that, look, he's awesome, but I think this is more about the overall engine of the Indiana Pacers and the style that they play. I don't know how essential he is to that style. He's definitely their best player. He's definitely their most important player. But look, like there was even a game less than 2 weeks ago where he had 4 points against the Cleveland Cavaliers. Now, I don't think he played a lot late in that game because Cleveland, the one game that they won, they absolutely blew him out. But I'm just saying, if you see other guys that are best players in their team scoring 4 points on any given night, I mean, those guys are rightfully crucified in the media. So I just want to note that even though he's had the clutch performances, he's not an every single game guy. He hasn't reached that final level of consistency that is the hardest thing to do for these NBA superstars. Tyrese still isn't there yet, but he does have this series against the Knicks and potentially an NBA final series to kind of rewrite that narrative. So it is just kind of interesting to lay out what it would look like if any of these teams win the title. And I think that it's a complete coin flip between these teams in the East. But ultimately, my gut is whoever comes out of the West is going to be my pick to win the NBA Finals. Let's keep it moving and talk about the Western Conference Finals, in which OKC was able to capture the first game at home against the Timberwolves. This game was definitely winnable for the Minnesota Timberwolves. They had an awesome first half, highlighted by an incredible Julius Randle performance, particularly from beyond the arc. I think he ended up making like 5 of 6 threes in this game, and I think at least 4, maybe even all 5 of them came in the first half, and the Wolves were up double digits at one point early in this game. But in typical Oklahoma City Thunder fashion, they had a monster run in the third quarter. Shai got going a little bit despite really struggling shooting from the field in the third quarter, and the Thunder were able to win this one pretty comfortably. It's basically impossible to get a better Julius Randle game than what you got last night, despite the fact that Randle has been awesome in this postseason. But it really killed them the fact that Naz Reid, who I know some Timberwolves fans out there were getting a little chesty with how good Naz Reid was against the Oklahoma City during the regular season. Pretty sure they split that series 2-2, and Naz Reid was a big part of that. He was basically a total no-show. I think he ended up making like 1 field goal on the entire night. I think he finished like 1 of 9, maybe 1 of 10 shooting, something like that. He was terrible and had some really bad turnovers late in that game as well. Dante DiVincenzo, it seems like the Thunder were pretty comfortable leaving him open from deep. He was shooting the ball with confidence all night long, but I think he only ended up making 2 of those shots when it was all said and done. And OKC just has a lot of different lineups that they are able to throw at Anthony Edwards and the Timberwolves as a whole, right? You have a guy in Kenrich Williams who basically didn't play the entire postseason. They dust him off the bench, and they immediately bring him in the game for the second half to try to slow down Julius Randle. And he did an awesome job doing that and also knocked down all of his shots. I mean, this Thunder team is so deep, it's really scary. It's just such a luxury to be able to dust off a guy like that after not playing for several weeks and have the confidence in him to actually step up in a big game and to knock the rust off and do that is pretty nuts. And just the gauntlet that they're able to throw at Anthony Edwards. Like, as far as I could tell, for the most part, the assignment on Ant was either Dort or Cason Wallace, but you also saw some Caruso sprinkled in there. You also saw some J-Dub sprinkled in there. Sometimes Shai's going to be on him as well. And it just really wasn't his night. He settled for jumpers a lot more than he would have liked to. Didn't put a lot of pressure on the rim like we're used to seeing from Ant, and didn't get to the free throw line all that much. I think in the first half, the Timberwolves went to the line like 1 time, and if I'm not mistaken, it was for like a technical foul. Now, they ended up getting to the line a little bit more in the second half, so the final free throw totals weren't that far off. But it was still a pretty big advantage for OKC. A lot of that was due to the fact that Shai was getting some pretty unbelievable whistles in that one, right? Like, there was this play late in the game that ended up being the dagger for OKC, where basically like completely horizontal, like falling over, hit a pretty crazy layup. But when you actually watch, it was an and one, and he was basically not even touched at all by Anthony Edwards, and he got the benefit of the doubt there. There was one, it looked like a pretty routine step back at the elbow, guarded by Jaden McDaniels, and then no contact whatsoever, but Shai kind of stumbled, and they gave him an and one on that one too. That one kind of drove me nuts because the broadcast didn't even bother calling out how ridiculous that foul call was, but whatever. I mean, look, Shai got away with at least 4 or 5 whistles that I don't think he should get, especially in a playoff setting. But the reality is Shai is incredibly skilled at drawing those fouls. If he wasn't so athletic, if he didn't have such a tight handle, and he wasn't constantly getting guys like a half step behind him and putting the defense in a compromised position where now they have to close out a little bit harder or lunge at him to contest a shot, then he wouldn't be able to draw fouls as much as he does. Now, the flopping, the foul baiting, whatever you want to call it from there, is definitely a skill that Shai has in his arsenal. But with the way he's able to get to the rim, with the way he's able to get to his spots, that is still a really important part of the puzzle. And I'm not going to lie to you, even if the whistle wasn't so generous for SGA last night, the Thunder still would have ended up winning that game pretty comfortably. I think they ended up winning by a little bit over 20 points, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, it wasn't close late in that game. And so, as much as we want to bitch about it, and as much as it was really hard to watch for a decent stretch, especially in that third quarter, I'm not going to lie. I don't think the officials changed the result of that game. So, while we're talking about the Oklahoma City Thunder, I did just want to note congratulations to SGA. It was announced that he is the 2025 NBA MVP. Shout out me for calling that out before the season. That was my pick. So hopefully at least a few of you guys were able to cash in on that. But I do think it was a really close race. I would have gone with Jokic personally. I just think that the incredible individual performance that we saw from him this season was not enough to offset the total number of wins. I think Denver had exactly 50 wins. I think that the Thunder finished with 68 wins. So an 18-win difference is definitely significant, but I still felt like Jokic should get the nod there. But I'm not upset about it. Shai had a truly incredible season, led the league in scoring. All that stuff is great. My biggest frustration with the MVP this year is the fact that we're just now finding out about this on May 21st. What is the NBA thinking? I'd like to remind you guys that all the ballots for this are due on like the final day of the regular season, or a couple days after the end of the regular season. So the NBA has known the winner of this award for literally over a month at this point. Like, it's pretty nuts. And they just decided to randomly stagger the announcements of these awards, like starting with Coach of the Year and Sixth Man and all that stuff. And they've been slow rolling it. And they finally announced earlier in the week that they were going to tell us who the MVP is today. And I think that they were planning on doing some big announcement on TNT before tonight's game. They didn't even get that shine. They didn't even get the viewership from that big announcement on TV because Shams decided to leak it in the middle of the day on a Wednesday. I don't like the idea of dragging it out at all. I think that there should be an announcement during that play-in week. Now that you have that baked in time between the end of the regular season and the start of the playoffs where the ballots are already submitted, if you want to do an award show, you got to do it that week of the play-in, or just make all the announcements in one fluid broadcast. It doesn't have to be a big thing where the players are there or whatever. Get those announcements out early. But if you want to slow roll it a little bit, what better time is there to announce the MVP than in round 2 when the 2 finalists for the awards are literally playing each other? Let's keep it pushing. OKC in this series. They go up 1-0. It's a comfortable win. They survive a really great shooting game from Julius Randle. And now they have the opportunity to go up 2-0 before they go back to Minnesota. Now, I do think that this is going to end up being a pretty competitive series. I wouldn't say that Minnesota is an outright better team than Denver, but it's definitely a much better defensive matchup against what OKC wants to do. I mean, Denver got into a pretty good rhythm with the zone that they were throwing at the Thunder, and it seemed to throw off SGA off his game a little bit. Now, Minnesota has the horses to defend the Thunder straight up, definitely better than Denver does, but it didn't seem like their defense did that great of a job overall against OKC last night. So it'll be interesting to see if they sprinkle some more zone in, or if they just trust the guys that they have on their roster to guard SGA. It was a lot of Jaden McDaniels, and he ended up fouling out of this pretty early on in the fourth quarter, so maybe they make an adjustment there. Obviously, Shea's cousin, which is kind of a fun storyline, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, he had a lot of opportunities guarding Shea as well, and ultimately held up pretty well in those matchups that I saw. I do think it's pretty fascinating that the Timberwolves, probably their best matchup for Shea in a vacuum is going to be Anthony Edwards, which I'm really hoping at least a few of these games ends up coming down to the wire where Ant is guarding Shea on one end. But the reality is you don't want to risk getting Anthony Edwards in foul trouble, and with how much of the load that he has to carry on the offensive end of the court, it'd be pretty stupid for Minnesota to throw Ant at SGA all game long. But my pick for this series was OKC in 6 games, but Minnesota's never going to be out of this series. OKC deserves to be an overwhelming favorite. History would tell you it's extremely rare for anyone below a 3 seed to ultimately win an NBA title, especially when you roll in the fact that OKC was historically good in the regular season. This was a 68-win team with a historically great defense that has proven to come in clutch. And frankly, I learned a lot about OKC in that series against Denver, right? I don't want to spend a ton of time talking about that series because it's kind of old news at this point, and Game 7 ended up being a dud. They were able to clutch out a few wins that I didn't know that they had in them. OKC should feel very similarly to what the Celtics did last year, and forgive me for all the comparisons here, but last year it was a pretty unique Final Four. Not a lot of people saw the Mavericks coming. People certainly didn't see the Timberwolves or the Pacers being in the conference finals last year, and somehow we're in the same spot. The Thunder were the only certainty. And I say all that because despite the fact that OKC has easily the best situation of any team in the NBA when you include the current talent on the roster, the current success of the team, and then layer in the treasure chest of picks that OKC has to play with over the next 5 years, I still think OKC is under massive pressure to win this title. When you're looking around and you see 3 other teams that you didn't even expect to be there, you're the healthiest team, you're the best team that's gelling right now, you have to take advantage of these windows. As a Celtics fan, I wasn't thinking we had like this massive 5 to 10 year window ahead of us, but I certainly expected to be in the mix this year and next year, and now all that is gone to shit over one injury. So just noting that the Thunder should feel a lot of pressure to win this. So before I let you guys go, I was watching the Pacers game earlier today and thinking about how unbelievable Andrew Nembhard and Aaron Nesmith were in this game. I was thinking about playoff risers, the guys who've been most impressive relative to expectations during the 2025 NBA playoffs. And I'll run through my list of the top 5 playoff risers of the 2025 NBA playoffs. So at the top of this list, even though this team is already eliminated, I have to show some love to Aaron Gordon. I think he was unbelievable during the first 2 rounds of the playoffs. And look, even though he only played in 2 rounds, we did get a full 14 games from Aaron Gordon because both round 1 and round 2 went 7 games. And so obviously you think back to the buzzer beater dunk that he had against the Clippers and the game-winning 3 against OKC in game 1. And honestly, I still feel like if he didn't completely tear his hamstring off the bone at the end of game 6, and he came into game 7 healthy, and the Nuggets had a little bit more juice. Even though that game ended up being a blowout, I think Aaron Gordon is important enough to potentially swing that game. And I just think he has completely solidified himself as like a Nuggets Hall of Famer with what he meant to the championship run a couple years ago and his contributions this year. Another guy I want to name is Julius Randle. I mean, he was unbelievable, especially in that second round against the Golden State Warriors. Completely dominated the matchup with Draymond Green, which I don't think a lot of people saw coming. And even though the fact that everybody was picking Minnesota once Steph Curry went down, Golden State is still a team that is really well coached and has a ton of playoff experience. So the fact that Julius Randle was able to rise to the occasion and basically look like a mini Bron out there with how he was able to not just score the basketball, but facilitate as well and just really inflict his will on the other team, and especially when the other team had a Defensive Player of the Year candidate in Draymond Green. I mean, Julius Randle's been unbelievable, and he continued that in game 1. My next guy on this list, I gotta show some love to Alex Caruso. I really feel like he was the story of game 7 against the Denver Nuggets. For any of you that missed it, OKC was really experimenting in this game with a smaller lineup of no Chet, no Hartenstein. And the main reason they were able to go to such a ridiculously small lineup is because they felt comfortable with Alex Caruso guarding Nikola Jokic. Granted, Caruso definitely got away with hacking the shit out of Jokic on many different plays throughout that game 7, but overall his denial of the basketball and just the will to not even let Jokic get into his offense. I mean, that was really incredible how little shots Jokic took. Like, they wouldn't let him get the ball to impact the game. It was unbelievable, and Caruso was a massive part of the 2020 Lakers championship run, so his ascension in the playoffs shouldn't be a big surprise, but he also made a ton of plays, forcing turnovers on the defensive end of the court, knocked down threes at a really high clip. He's the perfect guy, a team that's trying to get over the hump like OKC needs to go out and acquire. And if OKC is eventually able to win the title, Caruso and Hartenstein and their moves this past offseason are going to be the biggest reasons as to why. The fourth guy on my top 5 playoff risers list, I got to show some love to Mitchell Robinson. The fact that this guy, when healthy, was good enough to ultimately swing that matchup against the Boston Celtics is still something that I'm processing to this day, right? The big difference between the first 3 matchups against the Celtics during the regular season, where the Celtics steamrolled the Knicks, and then they suddenly get Mitchell Robinson back toward the end of the regular season. He plays in the regular season game against the Celtics in late April, and that game ends up going to overtime. It took some pretty insane heroics from Jason Tatum just to pull that one out. And then, of course, we saw what he did to the Celtics in round 2, dominating the offensive glass. Even despite his woes at the free throw line that the Celtics put on full display, he had a massive impact on the game. He had the best plus minus out of anybody on the Knicks, and he's one of the best rim protectors in the entire NBA. It's kind of wild that the Knicks have now unlocked this 2-big lineup that's eerily similar to what Minnesota pulled off last year with Cat and Rudy Gobert. They're doing something similar with Cat and Mitchell Robinson, which is just crazy to think about now. And then the final playoff riser spot, I feel like I am completely torn here. I guess I could just make this a top 6 playoff risers and run with that, but right now I have Andrew Nembhard and Aaron Nesmith sharing a spot. I actually had to check the statistics to see which one of these guys increased their production in the playoffs more, and I was just going to give it to that, but even then, it's basically identical. Both of these guys increased their points per game by over 4 points going from this year's regular season to this year's playoffs, which is really an absurd jump. I mean, most guys across the board, you see their numbers decline in the playoffs because scoring is down. So the fact that the Pacers have 2 guys in their starting lineup that looks like they're made for the moment, I mean, it's pretty nuts. I guess I'll give it to Aaron Nesmith just because that NBA Jam-esque run he just had at the end of game 1 was one of the craziest heat checks of all time. So I guess I'll give Nesmith the nod right now, but there's plenty of time for Nembhard to creep onto this list as well. And I think between Aaron Gordon, Julius Randle, Aaron Nesmith, Alex Caruso, and Mitchell Robinson, we've seen all of these guys rise to the occasion in the 2025 NBA playoffs. And then finally, the last exercise I wanted to do before I let you guys go is just ranking the worst exits of round 2. Just wanted to put a bow on some of the teams that were eliminated because I was mainly focused on my Boston Celtics during my previous few podcast episodes. And so ranking the exits from the least disappointing to the most disappointing, at number 4 on this list, this is where I have the Denver Nuggets. Even though I had this team going all the way to the NBA Finals, they ultimately ended up coming up short, losing in Game 7 of Round 2 for the second year in a row. I still think that Denver shouldn't be too upset with how things ended. I think they still showed that, by all accounts, this team is still good enough to contend, and I'd really have a hard time with anybody pushing back on that. I mean, the fact that they were really banged up, and it seemed like they were just a guy short all year long, and it didn't matter. They still took the Oklahoma City Thunder to a game 7. And if you get a hot shooting Jamal Murray in that game, you get a big performance from Russell Westbrook or Christian Brown or something like that, that could ultimately be the difference between a series win and a series loss. I don't think that Denver can really hang their head too much on this. I do think the better team won in Oklahoma City, even though I picked Denver to win that series. But just look at the injuries that Denver was dealing with, right? I mean, Michael Porter Jr. was playing with effectively like a football shoulder pad for most of the playoffs at this point. And like we talked about, Aaron Gordon's hamstring was significantly strained at the end of game 6, and he was just a shell of himself limping around in game 7. The fact that he was even out there was pretty nuts. And again, they were probably already a guy short to begin with. I mean, they were getting great contributions from Jokic, for the most part, Jamal Murray, certainly Aaron Gordon and Christian Brown. But that fifth spot, whether it was a banged up Michael Porter Jr. or Westbrook, who certainly had some moments in the playoffs, but ultimately came up short toward the end of that series. I mean, Strother, Peyton Watson, they all had their moments, but there was never that last guy that David Adelman could count on at the end of a close game. Usually he went with Porter in those situations, and it kind of burned them earlier in the game. Like, it felt like game 7 was destined to go OKC's way no matter what, but I think it was those 2 games in the middle that Denver ended up losing that were still pretty competitive. Those definitely could have been won by the Nuggets, and maybe if he had made a different decision, coaching-wise or lineup-wise at the end of the game instead of Michael Porter Jr., I think Denver could have easily pulled out that series. So just given everything they were up against injury-wise and just a lack of talent to OKC, I think they are still proven that if they can improve this roster a little bit in the offseason, they're going to be right back to contending next year. So I don't think Denver has really any reason to hang their head after round 2. The third most disappointing exit of round 2, I have to go with the Golden State Warriors. They definitely get a free pass because Steph Curry got hurt, right? Not necessarily a free pass, like it was still disappointing to lose 4 straight games after Steph got injured. Really, all they had to do to give themselves a remote chance of winning the series was stealing one of those games. I think their best chance to do that was in game 3, where they were in charge, having the lead for most of that game, and they ended up blowing it late. But they still lost 4 straight games, right? Like, you're looking at that roster and you're just asking yourself, what is the true ceiling of this team? Because even though it's hard to say without Steph, I think we kind of knew that I would not put Golden State in that class of the true contenders. I think we learned enough about that team, even in the absence of Steph Curry, that again, they were a couple guys short. Now, the positive thing was that they were at least able to rebuild Jonathan Kuminga's trade value a little bit after he had completely fallen out of the rotation. Ended up having a 30-point game in the mix in there. So he had some good moments for Golden State down the stretch, but ultimately, I never really felt like they had a shot in any of those games besides maybe game 3. And Jimmy Butler, he was an incredible acquisition. He really raised the ceiling of the team after they acquired him at the trade deadline, but it was pretty clear that he's at a different phase of his career where he wasn't even being aggressive enough, not even shooting the shots that you would want to see him take with the absence of Steph Curry. And down the stretch, like, you can't have your best player in that situation shooting single-digit times. It's just not going to result in wins. And so I think that the true ceiling of Golden State is probably just like a really good regular season team. Maybe they can sneak up to be like a top 3 seed in the West next year. But unless they're able to make a significant roster change yet again and find another way to retool around both Steph and Jimmy, I'm not going to take this team seriously as a contender next year, and so that's why they're third on my list. Second most disappointing exit of round 2. I think this one was really close, but this is where I had the Cleveland Cavaliers. Just so disappointing for them to be so dominant during the regular season, a 64-win team, if I'm not mistaken, and now it kind of feels like they need to go back to the drawing board a little bit. I know that Evan Mobley was hurt. I know that Darius Garland was hurt. I know that DeAndre Hunter was hurt. They all missed a game in this series, and they also were banged up a little bit even when they came back. But you still don't have any excuse to get dominated in 5 games like you did the Indiana Pacers. Like, you had a couple blowouts in there. You had a really crazy comeback by Indiana where you blew a lead late in the game. It's one thing to lose to Boston, like a lot of people had them penciled in to do. If you lose to the defending champs, if you make it all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals, that's one thing, but you're right back to where you were the previous year. You literally played in the same exact number of games as what you did the previous year. That's a tough pill to swallow. I also just don't know if I'm missing something with Evan Mobley. Like, I think this guy is an awesome player. There's no doubt about it. It's a great draft pick by the Cleveland Cavaliers. I think you definitely had an argument to be made for Mobley as Defensive Player of the Year. I couldn't quite get there, but he's ultimately the guy that ended up winning that award. But when I watch him and I listen to the way that people who I really like and respect their basketball opinions, but when I hear people like that talk about Evan Mobley, I just feel like I'm missing something. Like they're putting him in some conversation where they think of him as like the Cavs' most valuable asset and the Cavs' best overall player. It's like, what are we talking about? I can't really think of like a notable Evan Mobley moment. And I do feel like I watch enough basketball and enough Cavs to be able to speak on that. And so again, there's plenty of room for this guy to grow. He's still young in his career, but I just don't think he's the type of offensive ceiling where he's really going to elevate a team to a contending status on his own, or even if he has like a good supporting cast. And I don't know, I don't mean to come across as a hater. I just feel like there's something I'm missing with Evan Mobley. A really disappointing exit by Cleveland, but ultimately the most disappointing exit is my team, the Boston Celtics. Maybe I'm being a little too critical here. Maybe you could make the argument that Cleveland should be in this spot, but I just still can't wrap my mind around the fact that the Celtics probably would have lost to the Knicks anyway, even if it was not for that Jason Tatum injury. Like, we really will never know, right? That's just the reality of the situation. There's a lot of what ifs in sports, and I do think that the Celtics easily could have made that 3-1 comeback, right? We saw them come back from a 3-0 deficit and force a game 7 and win 3 straight games against the Miami Heat just 2 years ago. And frankly, if Tatum doesn't get hurt in that game 7, who knows? Maybe they're the first team to ever come back from a 3-0 deficit. I mean, again, we'll never know about that either. But it was really cool to see the Celtics rally a bit and get that win for Tatum at home in game 5 and blow the Knicks out, just like they had done in game 3. And that incredible Luke Cornett game and an unbelievable Jaylen Brown performance. It really felt like we had some shred of hope heading into game 6 just to get our doors blown off. But yeah, the reality is that I thought this was a championship team no matter what. I thought we were the outright favorites to win the title, and I felt really good about them having the opportunity to be back-to-back. And not only do I have to stomach this loss to the New York Knicks, but I also have to wrap my mind around the fact that the Celtics are probably cooked for next season as well, or at least the landscape looks radically different. Again, I do want to do a full offseason breakdown at some point where we preview what the Celtics should do, and maybe I can get RJ on the horn for this as well. But right now, if you ask me my gut feeling, I would say that Tatum, Brown, and Derek White are the big 3 of this team in my mind moving forward, and the 3 guys that I just don't want to touch. I know that there's a lot of different people out there saying to maximize all the assets you can around Jason Tatum and use this as like a rebuilding year while he recovers. And I get all that, but I just don't think you're going to recoup proper value for Jaylen Brown and Derek White in particular. Brown, because of the talent, everything that he's done for the city, and the pairing with Tatum has worked really well to this point. And White, because he might be just the best contract in the entire NBA for what he brings you. And I know he had a really bad game 6 like everybody else, but he was pretty unbelievable earlier in that season. And then if we look onto the guys that I do think are likely to be playing on a different team next year, the first 3 that come to mind are Kristaps Porzingis, Sam Hauser, more because of his contract and the lack of need for his services in particular, with Baylor Shireman waiting in the wings, and then Drew Holiday. I think all 3 of those guys have a really good shot to join a new team, but at the same time, I'm not saying that's a guarantee either, right? The front office could be looking at this as like, hey, Tatum, there was some buzz around when he got the surgery and the fact that the surgery went really well. They did it right away, and so that could shorten the recovery timeline. And, with his age and how quickly he's been able to recover in the past, like, maybe he's able to come back after 9 months and then suddenly he's back in time for April for a playoff run, which I think is pretty insane as I say that out loud, but I don't want to rule that out. And then you're looking at the Eastern Conference where the Bucks are in a really tough spot. The Cavs might have to go back to the drawing board, and the Celtics should still have a lot of confidence looking at teams like the Knicks and the Pacers being their biggest threat. So all I'm saying is that it's wide open, and it's really a bummer that this team was set up for a multiple year championship run that it's now been cut short. And we do have to open things up for this team to look radically different this offseason, but I'm just not so quick to hit the button to blow it all up, because this team was proven that they were able to get over the hump last year. And if they are able to get guys healthy and figure out the contract situations, if we are able to go into the luxury tax a little bit, maybe this team still has a window to contend. I think next year would be pretty insane, but the following year for sure. So that is my 10,000 foot view on the Boston Celtics. I definitely think it's the most disappointing exit. I'm still wrapping my mind around the fact that we fair and square went down 3-1 to the New York Knicks, and then we're never going to know what happened with Tatum's injury, but it is a massive bummer, and I don't want to let my team off the hook for having an incredibly disappointing end of the season and falling to the same fate as the previous 7 defending champions. I'm sure many of you guys have heard this by now, but the defending champions have not made it past round 2 since, I believe, like the 2018 Warriors that ended up going back to back. So ever since then, the defending champion has either missed the playoffs, been eliminated in round one, or eliminated in round two. And of course, the Celtics have suffered that fate as well. So that's going to do it for this podcast episode. Before I let you guys go, be sure to follow at Words with Wallace on everything. That includes Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you get your podcasts. Also, be sure to follow at Words with Wallace on social media. I promise I'm going to try to crank up the social media content a little bit more now that work's been a little bit less crazy and there's less games for me to keep up on. Hopefully I can get back to posting reels more consistently and just tweeting during the games a little bit more. So at Words with Wallace on all social platforms there. I should be back next week. I'm really hoping to get my guy Garrett on there. I haven't even shot him a text yet, but I do want to focus on the Minnesota Timberwolves a little bit because of this crazy run that they're on, getting back to the Western Conference Finals for the second year in a row. And frankly, I'm rooting for the Wolves, right? Even though I'm picking OKC to win at this point, not that anybody cares about my opinions. For what it's worth, I didn't have any of these four teams advancing to the conference finals, so I'm basically sitting here with a completely busted bracket, which is totally acceptable for March Madness, but less acceptable when we're talking about the NBA. That's more predictable, and I do consider myself somewhat of an NBA expert, but I guess I just don't know shit either. But it would be really fun to get my guy Garrett on, talk about the Minnesota Timberwolves, and really outline their path to winning a title. So that's kind of what I'm thinking for next episode, but I will be back within the next week either way, and I will talk to you guys then. Peace.